In the following year, 1998, the capital markets started to fall apart because of problems in Asia, and then Russia started to get infected by the Asian crisis, and pretty soon Russia was having trouble rolling over its debt, and pretty soon after that Russia defaulted on its obligations. They devalued the currency by 75%, and I lost for my investors $900 million. I went down 90%. 90%. $900 million. That's real money. I can't even begin to describe to you what it feels like to lose $900 million. And partly, I mean, it wasn't just a financial loss. It wasn't like it was a public humiliation and a public disgrace that's just hard to even comprehend. And I took it very personally, and I decided I didn't care what happened. I was going to climb out of this hole no matter what. And so I made it my absolute conviction that I was going to get out of this hole no matter what. I was going to get everyone's money back no matter what it took. I was going to stay there. I was going to fight it out. And it was a very unusual decision to take. Almost everybody who I knew had left Moscow after this crash. Everyone said, you know what, whatever, time to move on. And people went on to the internet bubble and whatever. But I stayed. And it should have been, based on what happened, it should have been not that hard to climb out of this hole, because I was investing in oil companies, and they sold their oil in dollars, but they paid for their expenses in rubles that had just devalued, and so their costs went down by 75%. And so in theory, the companies I was investing in should have become immensely profitable immediately, and that should have made everything recover. But the problem was, after the collapse of Russia, Wall Street and London closed for any Russians to ever come and raise money again for any purposes. Everybody thought of Russia as being a toxic wasteland financially. And so the oligarchs, who were the majority shareholders in these companies, said to themselves, if we're not able to get money on Wall Street, that was the only reason why we ever behaved ourselves. Why would we have done anything? Why would we have not stolen from people? I mean, the rules don't prevent us from stealing from people. There's no rules that punish us if we do. And now that Wall Street is closed, let's just steal. That's the economically rational thing to do. And so the oligarchs of Russia embarked on an orgy of stealing, which has been unprecedented in the history of business. They were doing asset stripping, dilutions, embezzlement, transfer pricing, you name it, they were doing it. And there I was with my measly 10 cents on the dollar, the hole that I was trying to climb out of, and they were going to steal the last bit that I had. And so I decided I was going to fight. I was going to fight the oligarchs. Bill Browder from the south side of Chicago was going to fight the oligarchs. So, and my first big fight, or I should say not my first one, my most famous big fight was with Gazprom. I'm sure you've all heard of Gazprom. In 1999, Gazprom traded at a 99.7% discount per barrel of reserves, of oil reserves, to BP and Exxon. It was trading almost at zero. Why was it so cheap? Because everybody assumed that every single thing in the company had been stolen. Because that's what was happening, that's what looked like was happening everywhere, particularly at Gazprom. And so one day, I got together with my research team, and I said, let's do a stealing analysis of Gazprom. Let's figure out how much they're actually stealing. Because I've got this hunch that maybe they're not stealing everything. And so one of my guys said, well, how do you do a stealing analysis? And I said, well, I don't know. They didn't teach it at Stanford Business School. But because I was a consultant, I learned one thing as a consultant, which is very helpful, that if you don't know the answer to something, you go and interview people, you go set up meetings with people, and you ask them lots of questions, and then sometimes if they know the answers to stuff, they'll tell you. And if you talk to enough people, then they have enough information, you bring it all together, and that's how you learn stuff. So I said, let's do that with Gazprom stealing. So we then looked around and we said, let's just set up meetings with people, breakfast, lunch, and let's do it around meal times because people like meals. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, tea, coffee, dessert, any meal that we could offer somebody to get a meeting to ask them how much stealing was going on at Gazprom. And we set up meetings with competitors and customers and ex-employees and suppliers and current employees and just anyone who would meet with us to see what we could glean from the situation. And remarkably, people started spilling their guts out to us about the stealing. It turned out that Russia, people were so angry at not being cut in on this stealing that if they weren't participants, they sure didn't want the other guys to get away with it. And Russia has always been sort of had a culture of being, of informing. And so people sort of had that in their hearts. And so here we were, and they had a good motivation, which is to tell on the guys who weren't sharing. And we filled up 2 notebooks full of these unbelievable anecdotes about how money was being stolen, who was doing it, who was getting it, who was not, et cetera, et cetera. And then we said to ourselves, this is great, but what do we do with this? Because this could all be just made up, exaggerated, stuff. And we then discovered something truly interesting about Russia, which is, for any of you who have ever been there, it's the most bureaucratic country in the world by far. Every single thing that you do in Russia gets written down on a piece of paper. If you go to the bathroom, you have to write down you're going to the bathroom, and then someone collects that information and registers it at the Ministry of Health, the number of people using that bathroom and their names. And they do that for everything else. And so one of my employees became a specialist in going to the sort of dusty halls of cobwebbed ministries where the database people were. And nobody ever went to visit the database people. And these people were very happy to provide this information, and we collected all sorts of disks containing information about beneficial ownership of companies, exports, all asset transfers, you name it, they had it. And we took these databases, compared it with the stuff we learned from these anecdotes, and we came up with the 2 most amazing conclusions of my professional life. The first was that the management of Gazprom, 9 individuals, between 1996 and 1999, had stolen an oil company the size of Exxon out of Gazprom. Exxon is very big. Exxon is as big as Kuwait. 9 guys. It has to be, I haven't checked it out, but it has to be the largest fraud in history by any stretch of the imagination. 9 guys. But the second most important conclusion, actually the first most important conclusion, the second conclusion, was that an oil company the size of Exxon only represented 9.65% of Gazprom's reserves. More than 90% of it was still there. So the market is saying everything has been stolen, and we've just concluded factually and analytically that almost all of it is still there. That none of it has been stolen other than 9.65% of the company. So we did 2 things with this information. The first thing is I made Gazprom my single largest investment. It became 30% of my fund. We had to go back and get special dispensation from our investors to raise it from 20 to 30%. The second thing I did was something, again, that has changed my life forever, which is we took this document that we created, we broke it into 7 chapters, and we gave the first chapter to the New York Times. We gave the second chapter to the Financial Times, third chapter to the Washington Post, 4th chapter to Business Week, etc. And we said, you all have a week to write about it, otherwise we're going to give it to your competitor.